So we have another story by H.G. Wells titled The Cone. Now, we can definitely find similarities between the cone and the stolen basilisk. But first, we would want to identify some elements of our story here. So this story is going to be third person because our narrator is not going to be in the story. So we need to know whose point of view do we have. So the first character we meet is, well, we meet a man and a woman having this conversation about, he thinks nothing of the works, but the works and the prices of fuel. He has no imagination, no poetry. So we learn that the guy that this woman's talking to, he's supposed to be an artist of sorts. So that would be, and we're going to learn his name is Rout. And both Rout and this woman, they see this iron industry. So this would be the late 1800s. So, and we're somewhere in England where we have our Industrial Revolution. And they're commenting on how the Industrial Revolution has destroyed the beauty of the land. And then we also, all right, so every muscle in Rout's body became tense. So we're in the point of view or the perspective, we're getting the perspective of Mr. Rout. And the point of view is going to switch because here we're also going to get our conflict. So Rout would be our story's protagonist here, the character with the conflict. And his conflict is he has fallen in love with the wife of this guy, Mr. Horrocks. And we could say the name Horrocks kind of sounds like horrible. So that could be our characterization. And then we also switch to the point of view of Horrocks. So not only do we learn that Horrocks is this lady's husband, but he's also the friend to Mr. Rout, and he is aware of their affair because here they're talking about leaving together. So the point of view switches between Mr. Horrocks, Mr. Rout. That's meant to build our story's suspense because now we as the reader know that this guy Horrocks, he definitely knows about the affair. Then we also get the point of view of Mrs. Horrocks. We learn that she is basically scared of her husband and he is a dangerous guy. But Mr. Rout is not going to be aware of that. So now the point of this, so basically Mr. Rout wanted Horrocks to show him like the beauties of the steel industry, the iron industry, by taking him to show him at nighttime how these cinders were going to look because they'd be all like melted with the hot, whatever they're melting here. So that's why Horrocks was taking Mr. Rout there. So we now know that they're having an affair. Mr. Rout doesn't think that Horrocks is dangerous, and Mr. Rout does not think that Horrocks knows. So that certainly builds our story's suspense, also irony here. And as the story progresses, so this is our rising action, basically he almost throws him in, right? So here they're looking at the puffs of smoke, and at one point he almost pushes him into like the train tracks. Just as certain as it was that Horrocks held him there, so it was that he had been violently lugged out of danger. So Horrocks saves him in like the split second. So more of Mr. Rout's point of view, we're learning that he's starting to get suspicious. So that would definitely be building more suspense for the reader. What is going to happen here? And more suspense, we also get Horrocks' point of view about basically how angry he is. And our climax here of the story is when Horrocks makes the final decision to push him, and he's holding on to this cone thing, basically burning him alive. And that would be our ending. And we could also say, or our falling action is basically Horrocks like immediately having regret here. His sanity returns to him. So we might wonder, like, does Horrocks actually regret his actions? Because he kind of almost seems to have planned this. So the following action is his regret. And then our resolution is people are coming. So we're pretty sure here that Horrocks is probably going to get in trouble. I mean, he could lie. So it kind of leaves us on this cliffhanger, well, with an open interpretation, an ending that's open for interpretation. We don't know, is Horrocks going to admit his guilt and come clean about this? We also know that Horrocks' wife was pretty suspicious, so is she going to tell? We're kind of left with, we're not sure if Horrocks is going to tell. We could make that assumption because he does cry out in guilt. So the questions we would have here: how does the story's setting develop the characters' conflicts? All right, well, first of all, we could say that Mr. Rout's conflict, he's going there to basically learn, he goes there for inspiration, but falls in love with an iron worker's wife. So we could say Mr. Rout's conflict is developed through the use of the story's setting because he is at an iron workers he is in an industrial town to gain inspiration from the iron smelters. That's what I guess they would be called, smelters. From the iron smelters. However, he falls in love with an iron worker's wife. And then we could say Horrocks' conflict is developed because he's making this decision on how he should get revenge. So you could say Mr. Horrocks' conflict is developed through the use of the story's setting because he is, we could say he is struggling to decide if he should murder the man his wife is having an affair with. Mr. Horrocks is influenced by the story's setting because there are many dangerous obstacles in his field of work. While he gives Mr. Rout a tour of the iron fields or smelters, he has several opportunities to kill the man. Oh wait, to kill him. To kill Mr. Rout and takes the opportunity to do so in the story's climax. So this would be just a rough way we could answer, and just think about how you could always use setting as a way to build a central idea. And we could say here, the setting builds a central idea of using one's workplace to take personal advantages, even though that would be kind of an odd one, because technically Mr. Horrocks, he does use his workplace to commit a murder. So you could maybe form some type of central idea about how either technology or people's places of employment, they could use them for negative or personal gain rather than for the betterment of the company. Then we have our examples of foreshadowing. So anytime we are switching from the point of view to Mrs. Rout, so we could say in the beginning, in the story's exposition, foreshadowing is used to build suspense because Mrs. Rout is thinking in her head about what an evil man her husband is. This foreshadows Mr. Horrocks' evil deed and also builds suspense that something bad will happen, basically. And then other examples of foreshadowing, we had Mr. Horrocks' name kind of foreshadows that he's going to do something horrible. We could say it was foreshadowing that Mr. Horrocks was going to seek some revenge because he obviously knew. This example, when Mr. Horrocks, his eyes went from the woman he had trusted to the friend he had trusted, then back to the woman. We could even use this quote here, and we could say, for our first example, that comes even before that, we could say, the story begins with a man and a woman having a conversation about running away together. The first example of foreshadowing is when the reader meets the husband of the woman. The husband is thinking, or we'll say H.G. Wells, because that's our author here. H.G. Wells switches the point of view to the husband. And we can say the reader is made aware that Mr. Horrocks knows about his wife's affair. And there we'll put it here. We could say this foreshadows that Mr. Horrocks may later seek revenge. And then we would have our next one where we have Mrs. Rout. And then another example of foreshadowing could be later in our story in the rising action. The rising actions foreshadowing happens the first time Mr. Horrocks attempts to kill Mr. Rout by pushing him into the train, because this would have showed that he was capable of such behavior. And for your last question, when you're going to talk about your central idea, you could talk about the central idea would just be the lesson. So if we were going to say that Mr. Horrocks regretted his actions, the central idea of the story, the central idea of the cone reveals how people can be pushed to extreme measures when they have been wronged by those they love. So this central idea kind of gives Mr. Horrocks a benefit of the doubt, where you're kind of giving him an excuse. Like, he did this because he loved his wife so much. So for this one, the literary element that this develops, we could say the conflict. And we write, Wells develops the central idea through the use of conflict, because Mr. Horrocks is wronged by his former friend, Mr. Rout. And that would be their conflict. How does it get resolved? In the end, it is resolved through Mr. Horrocks doing this extreme act of vengeance. So that could be one central idea. Another central idea could be about the use of technology, because that one would also go along with the stolen basilisk. So here we have Mr. Horrocks using technology in a evil way, basically, a vengeful way. So you could have a central idea about how people may use technology for the unintended measures. And both in the cone and the stolen basilisk, we have characters that were trying to use technology in a dangerous or threatening way. So if Mr. Rout is going to be our protagonist, he would have been viewing this technology as a way to gain inspiration for art, whereas Mr. Horrocks, it was his livelihood, how he made his income, but then he also used it as a way to seek revenge. And then with the stolen basilisk, we can talk about how the anarchist, he was also attempting to use technology, because having the bacteria to study is a form of technology, so he was trying to steal technology to use it in a negative way. And that could be one way we compare both stories and their central ideas. So this was lesson 4, H.G. Wells's The Cone.